us your email. Oh, okay. Please do feel free to send us your email address either in the chat or directly to Accountability Lab. So for those of you who are just joining us again, welcome. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Please share with us your name, the country in which you're based, and your organization. And I see someone has already started. Brian Sims, welcome from Humanity United. So it's 9:01 and we have 1 hour together. So I'm just going to start with the introductions. Welcome to our session, From High Level Talk to Grassroots Action, how we can support civic actors to achieve the Summit for Democracy commitments over the next year and beyond. This event today is organized by TraCCC and the Accountability Lab. Accountability Lab is a brilliant translocal network that makes governance work for people around the world by supporting citizens, responsible leaders, and accountable institutions. It has a network already of 11 labs in 11 countries and program partners in 3 additional countries. TraCCC, my home, stands for the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center, and it's a research, policy, and education center at the Schar School of Government and Policy that's devoted to understanding the links among terrorism, transnational crime, and corruption. I'd like to thank Blair Glencorse and Jean Scrimgeour from Accountability Lab for their cooperation with us at TraCCC for this event. And they're also behind the scenes facilitating our event. So though you may not see them, they're making this possible and will handle any glitches that might arise through technology, which hopefully is not going to happen. So again, please introduce yourselves. If you've just joined us in the chat, share with us your name, your country, and the organization or group to which you're affiliated. And if you'd like to stay in touch, please send us your email either in the chat or as a private message to Accountability Lab. So without further ado, let's start. We've got about 57 minutes left. We all know that democracy and civic space is regressing around the world. And that's one of the key concerns of the Summit for Democracy that's going to start the end of this week and will continue over the next year. But a part of that concern is something else. How do we support those on the front lines who are engaging in nonviolent action with their fellow citizens to actually claim their rights, preserve their democracies, win democracy, and keep open civic space or keep it open? We need a new paradigm for our new reality in the world. And in this session, we're going to start touching these questions. Why is it important to support nonviolent action? And how can international actors constructively provide support when those on the ground, in the grassroots, desire such support? My name, in case you're wondering, is Shaska Byerly, and I'm a senior fellow at TraCCC. Prior to that, I was a senior research advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace and was involved in a large research project that was conducted there that involved field research in a number of countries, including Nigeria, Kenya, Ukraine, Guatemala, and Myanmar, and also involved researching with international actors how they are providing support to nonviolent action protagonists, the obstacles they face, how they try to overcome them, and how can we look forward in developing new methods and approaches. So I've got 3 minutes, and I'm going to just to set the stage for our 4 brilliant discussants today. And the first thing I would just like to clarify is, what do we mean when we talk about nonviolent action and people power, so that we're all on the same page? So people power is basically the political, economic, social, and psychological pressure that citizens can wage, that they can wield when they come together collectively and engage in a variety of nonviolent activities. And so nonviolent action is essentially that method that in order to wield people power. From all the research that we did at USIP, I was thinking, what can we distill in 2 or 3 pithy takeaways to launch our session today? And that was really difficult, but let me just share 2. First is that nonviolent action can be manifested in a variety of ways. We often think about social movements, which is one of the key ways through which citizens can mobilize. But there are other ways too. For example, campaigns around very specific time-bound issues. They can also be even local civic initiatives in communities. So for example, social audits, which many of you are familiar with from the anti-corruption sphere, is a form of organized nonviolent action in many parts of the world. A second takeaway before I turn the floor to our brilliant discussants is that donors recognize that they need to expand their field of vision when they think about civil society. And they're seeking to basically recognize and engage with grassroots groups to respond to their needs. And their needs may be different from what they think are the needs. So there's a two-way exchange going on for constructive support, and it's about listening on the part of international actors, and it's about those who are protagonists at the grassroots articulating their needs about what they feel is necessary. And that revolves often around solidarity and protection from repression and intimidation. It often revolves around core and flexible support, and often about non-financial support. So we're not just talking about money, we're talking about other kinds of support, such as enabling peer-to-peer exchanges, providing platforms for people to come together, particularly during our COVID era now, so that they can start building alliances and coalitions either within their region, their country, or across borders. So I'm going to stop there. I think I used up my 3 minutes for a few takeaways. And I'd like to turn to our first discussant. Fred Bauma, whom I admire immensely, is a democracy activist, and member of the group La Lutte pour le Changement, otherwise known as Lucha, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. It's a nonviolent movement for social justice and democracy. And he also currently works as a research director at the Congo Research Center, a research project that's based at the Center of International Cooperation at New York University. So Fred, I'm giving you an impossible task in just 3 to 5 minutes. Can you at least touch on these 2 critical questions of our session? Why is grassroots nonviolent action important in terms of achieving the Summit for Democracy commitments? And why is it important that donors support this kind of approach? And how should donors and other external stakeholders be supporting such nonviolent grassroots action, both financially and or non-financially?
Thank you very much, Shaska. And you're right, probably it's a difficult question to answer in a few minutes, but I'm going to try. Let's start with the why, and I will speak mainly from a perspective of social movements, because that's my experience. As you said in your introduction, I think it's today a consensus that democracy is facing many challenges in many countries. We see the rise of authoritarianism, both in not only in African country where I'm from, but also globally. But it's also true that there is another trend, together with this the kill of democracy. That trend is the rise of social movement and non-violent actions. So even in the country where we see authoritarianism rising, we see almost equally people, usually young people, but also from all gender coming in and organizing themselves non-violently, and they put a lot of risk and a lot of courage to finally be the last protector of democratic systems. And I think one reason to support them is just by acknowledging that they become the last protector of democracy, whereas constitutions and other institutions that people have been trying to put together for years doesn't work. People remain engaged, and I think that is the main reason to protect them. And you can see it in different countries, right? Where in Zimbabwe, I can speak from Congo. We went through a democratization process with new constitution, new institutions, and for election to election, instead of seeing democracy advancing, we're seeing a backtrack on democracy. But at the same time, we have never seen as brilliant and engaged movement as we see today. So I think that enough reason to support them. Why also another reason maybe because this kind of way of organizing is really distributing power from the top to the bottom. The more people organize non-violently, the more people at the very bottom of the society hold their power. So it's a very practical way of saying bring back the power to the people. Actually, by organizing non-violently, we do it continuously. And I think if democracy has to be a sustainable one, it has to go through that redistribution of power. So maybe how could this movement be supported? With regard to this democracy summit, my first answer to that question will be on the political side. I think there are different leaders who will gather on this summit and different donors have to have a very honest conversation about their own actions. There is a lot of hypocrisy out there when people talk about democracy. Between the beautiful speeches around democracy and the actions that governments do, there is a huge gap. In many countries, we will see the same countries going around and saying they are promoting democracy. The same are the one actually supporting authoritarianism in the name of stability or in the name of preventing violence or whatever reason. But at the end of the day, they reinforce authoritarianism rather than promoting democracy. And I think by doing so, they are continuously undermining the work of nonviolent actors. And actually, this is a like nexus between democracy, corruption, and human rights, because with the rise of authoritarianism, the very first targets of those systems are these non-violence actors, including civil society and human rights activists. So honesty in the commitment of countries can be the first way of promoting it, including the US. The second way of supporting them is to understand what they are and what are they trying to achieve. If the idea here is to support movement, then donors and countries should give to this movement space where they can freely express what they are thinking of, how they envision the future, what are their utopia, what are they trying to achieve in their country. Supporting them means coming and understanding what they want and supporting what they want. And this has to do with the way, like, for example, the work of many organizations are structured. The feeling usually is that instead of accompanying movement or civil society in the continent, the civil society in the continent tend to accompany and to support international actors, because the agenda that they ended up implementing, because the financial system around around civil society organization in Africa is tightly controlled by international actors. And instead of supporting grassroots actors, actually grassroots actors become reduced to the only level of implementers of some project or some initiative led by global international actors. And I think there is a need to restructure that, to understand what civil society, local actors need, to understand what these movements need, and to understand also their need to be more involved, including in more political sensitive topic, and to accept that and to just support that. And I think that I'll stop by there.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. You had a monumental task, and thank you for sharing so much wisdom in such a short period of time. And listening to you, it also sounds like you're calling for a different paradigm. And this is about a power shift also in the relationship between grassroots actors and international actors. So there are two power shifts that you referred to, one within a country from top down to bottom up, but then also a more an equalized power shift on the part of the international community and grassroots protagonists. So thank you very much. I'd like to turn now to our second brilliant discussant, MacDonald Lewanika, and I should say doctor because he has recently earned his PhD too. Congratulations. He is the chief of party for the Accountability Lab Zimbabwe and has a long history of working with social movements as the former head of the Crisis Coalition in Zimbabwe. MacDonald, you have the same two tough questions. Why is nonviolent grassroots action important in terms of achieving the Summit for Democracy commitments, and that donors should support this kind of approach? And then how should donors and other external stakeholders be supporting such nonviolent grassroots action? So within 5 minutes, please share with us a few takeaways from your perspective.
Okay, no, thanks so much, Shaska, and I'll try my best to be brief. I think that the sentiments that that Fred shared are indeed shared amongst us in terms of why nonviolent grassroots action is important, especially when it comes to implementation of these Summit for Democracy possible actions, recommendations, and outcomes. And I want to start there, that we are discussing this in the context of a summit whose conversations aim at strengthening democracy, pushing back on authoritarianism and fighting corruption. And we all know that in the main, when we talk about the increase or growth of authoritarianism across the world, when we talk about the increase and growth of illiberal democracy, when we talk about crippling authoritarianism and increases in corruption, in the main, the parties that are responsible for that negative growth on things that are not good for people are themselves mostly people presiding over power at state level. These are governments, and while quite a number of them can be able to reform, we know that it is very, very difficult for you to ask those who are intransigent to change their behavior and expect that they will do so automatically. In order for that to happen in a meaningful way, we need to be able to look at where counterpower lies. We need to create an incentive or rebalance the forces in such a way that ensures that at the end of the day, those who are responsible for the growth of illiberal democracy, who are responsible for crippling authoritarianism, and who are in the main purveyors of corruption, you've got something that checks them. And that check is found theoretically within society, and society can be organized or is organized around civil society or non-state actors, and to some extent the private sector. So when we're looking for answers and solutions, I'm not saying that governments or states are inept and unable to ensure the meaningful implementation of the main subjects of the Summit for Democracy, but I think they do need help. They need to be incentivized, and often enough, what power understands is power. And I think that that counterpower that they may be able to understand is by and large found in nonviolent grassroots action, in the form of movements, in the form of community-based organizations, in the form of civil society organizations. I think that investing or pushing the strengthening of those particular entities can assist in the attainment of the results that we're looking for. And really, when we think about it in terms of what characterizes these kinds of organizations or grassroots movements that we are in the center of this conversation, you realize that is indeed the place where alternatives, and really when we talk about playing back, it is alternative ways of approaching these, especially three primary areas that we're talking about. And the place of alternatives will be found there. The place of authenticity will be found there. And if it is democratization that we're talking about, then it means that we need to broaden the space of engagement where that particular person is concerned. And we can do so meaningfully through supporting grassroots nonviolent action by way of social movements or community-based organizations or hyperlocal organizations. There are different ways in which that nonviolent grassroots action can manifest in different vehicles through which it can be able to move through. But I think that we are safe placing a bait and encouraging the sponsorship and encouragement of the work that these organizations do. I will not focus on some of the things that Fred has already said, and just make a case that it is important for us to think about this alternative or shift, as you put it, Shaska, for a variety of reasons. Primarily, also because when you look at it in terms of the agendas that we are pursuing, a lot of the successes that we have had over the last couple of years have actually come from nonviolent grassroots action rather than from orthodox NGO work, political party work, and in some instances even government. You know, some people, there is a saying that I once encountered, which said that the definition of madness is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different set of results. I think we need to admit and accept that some of the modes, methods, and vehicles that we've been using so far have not been up to the task. And it is only fair that we look at where success has been emerging and see how best we can be able to bolster that. And in my opinion, that success, when you look at organizations like Lucha, when you look at organizations like, I think, Balai Citoyen, there are examples all over the continent that we can be able to point to where this type of grassroots nonviolent action has been successful and presents us with a model that is worthy of support. And also because of the model around the demonstration effects of victories, small and large, that these have given us. I think the most hope and encouragement that we have received as civil society has indeed come from people who have been organizing non-violently at a grassroots level, at a local level, in inclusive fashions, in consultative fashions, and in non-violent fashions, both at the level of rhetoric and action. So that's my petition to the first part of the question, just adding to what Fred has placed on the table. Now, how can donors support? I think that part of the answer is already found in the introduction that you gave us, Shaska, that when we think about support to these kinds of organizations and movements, we need to think beyond just financial support. Because there are already challenges there. I can tell you that, you know, some of the big donors, like USAID and others, really struggle or do not have the tools that can effectively be able to support the kind of grassroots action or grassroots nonviolent action that we are talking about. So we do need to think beyond money, or even as we think about financing and resourcing, we need to think about creative mechanisms that can allow meaningful support to reach these types of organizations or entities. And I think that there are examples around how we can be able to do that. For instance, some variations of donor-actor collaboratives in ways that truly help grassroots movements. I can give you an example of some of the work that we've been doing as Accountability Lab with our Accountability Incubator. The Incubator is a year-long mentorship and training program that we offer as Accountability Lab to promising young social entrepreneurs and young civil society leaders. Now, these are people who are presiding over organizations that are too small for any big donor to be able to take note of. But the collaboration that we have, for instance, in Zimbabwe with USAID allows us to be able to channel and ensure that some kind of support goes to the growth and development of these organizations, increasing the terrain and platform around which accountability issues are discussed, and allowing these organizations to continue working and get some measure of support that ordinarily they would not be able to get to get by themselves. The second thing that I think we can look at beyond those kinds of mechanisms is challenging people with resources to come up with tailored mechanisms that can be able to support grassroots, meaningful nonviolent grassroots action. And these tailored mechanisms need to take into cognizance challenges around or get rid of some of the requirements that around systems and stuff. And we can do that through the mechanisms that I mentioned before, but also beyond financial probity of these particular institutions. If we can't come up with a vehicle that allows us to work with them in an accountable manner, donors should also be able to embrace ways that allow them to translate and facilitate engagement amongst these kinds of organizations. Donors have got the advantage of working in many places at once. They can be able to meaningfully facilitate and support collaboration, coordination, and cohesion, as well as capacity building of these kinds of organizations. And when we say capacity building, I know that for a lot of big donors, they don't think technical assistance or something like that. That is not what I'm talking about. I've got more to learn from Fred than I have to learn from a program officer at Ford Foundation or the British Embassy or something, on account of the experiences that colleagues in the DRC have on lived realities. And I think that donors who work with us have a responsibility to facilitate these contact points and ensure that we begin to learn to learn from each other and cross-pollinate ideas, so to speak. At accountability, and please do tell me, Shazia, when my 5 minutes are up.
If you could wrap up, McDonald, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Don't be shy. I usually tell people that I can talk for Africa, so if you let me, it will be problematic. Yeah, but okay. So the last thing that I just want to talk about is when I talk about cross-pollination of ideas and allowing movements to learn from each other. There is an interesting concept that we have been experimenting with at the lab. It's not something that we invented, but it's something that we believe is the answer around supporting some of these groups. And this is ensuring or supporting the notion of translocal networks in ways that allow these local initiatives and entities to be able to benefit from knowledge around each other's work, ways of organizing and shipping and getting solutions and adapting them, rather than the tendency that we see in some instances where there's sort of some kind of drop shipping of solutions from development partners to local entities. That is not sustainable. It will not encourage ownership. Transplanting of ideas does not work, and people support what they are party to creating and abhor that which is imposed on them. So that our end there is the encouragement just around broad talking points and thinking around how this may be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, McDonald. You really packed in so much valuable experiences and insights for us, and I was vigorously taking notes to capture everything. Even though I know the session's being recorded, I still needed to take down my own notes too. So if you saw me looking away from you, I was not checking texts on my phone. But you highlighted, I mean, just a couple of takeaways. That one, that donors often don't think that they have valuable networks, that because they work in many countries, and they can actually avail those networks to people at the grassroots who may not have had opportunities to interact. And second, a very good example of the way USAID is giving space in your own country for groups to come together and build their own collective basically collective efforts and their own networks. So that's very valuable. Out of moving along, I'd like to turn to our third brilliant discussant, Abigail Bellows. And Abigail is currently the deputy on USAID's anti-corruption task force. She's leading the task force's policy and partnership work. And she previously served at the Department of State and also as a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And she's also a community organizer. She's also done many other things, but she was modest to just give me a couple of sentences. So I'll stop there. But Abigail, you've worn many hats in your life, as we've all heard now. And so pulling together all this knowledge you have from both the government side and the community organizing side, could you, in 5 minutes, just share with us some key points about why is it important to support nonviolent grassroots action in terms of achieving the Summit for Democracy commitments, and that donors should be supporting this kind of approach when it's wanted, and how should donors and other international external stakeholders support such nonviolent protagonists? And I'm just going to set my little timer to remind me of the time. Please start, Abigail.
So much appreciation to the brilliant remarks of Fred and McDonald. I'm such a beneficiary of your wisdom, and I'm sure I will be a beneficiary of your wisdom too, Margaret. Very grateful for this session today. I think that it really sets the perfect tone for this whole week, that we are starting with a focus on grassroots actors and particularly civic actors. And I think that sometimes there can be discussion about grassroots civic movements as just generating the demand for reform, which of course is essential, as Fred said, the kind of energy or power base that can channel these reforms. But I also think it's critical in the implementation process. Like, even if governments do come out swinging in support of certain kinds of reforms, we all know that very quickly the train can run off the rails if it's not continuously being tethered to the real needs of people and being kind of anchored in that way. And so I think really through the whole life cycle of governance, there is a huge need for civic actors to be playing a role in kind of marshaling political will, but also channeling that political will in a way that actually helps deliver on the needs of people and the kind of original impetus for pushing government in a certain direction. So it really couldn't be more important. And I'm thrilled that, as we saw in the chat, Don Steinberg is here also from USAID, who's advisor to the administrator on this topic of localization and how can USAID, which is the largest development agency in the world, really pivot its approaches and create new systems so that it can be more adaptive and nimble to be able to support some of that grassroots work. So I'll just share briefly a couple of the reasons that I think we have some work cut out for us in this space, and then some of the opportunities I see. So we all agree of the importance of grassroots civic actors. But before joining USAID, as Shaska mentioned, I was conducting research at the Carnegie Endowment on some of the civil society dynamics in the open government field around the world. And that surfaced some challenges in terms of support to grassroots actors. And in particular, in the governance sector, we see that it's a highly technical topic sometimes, can deal with a lot of legal and regulatory and financial issues that mean that sometimes the groups that have the most familiarity with the problem and the way that governance issues manifest on the ground aren't necessarily as trained in understanding some of the solutions or figuring out, how to kind of do the complex financial analysis and legal analysis to come up with really tailored sort of interventions. And whereas some of the more capital-based, professionalized NGOs and think tanks maybe have some of that analysis, but don't have the people power that Shaska was talking about that is like so essential for powering these movements. So as a result, we end up with this disconnect where the technocratic NGOs are, have lots of smart policy solutions maybe, but they don't really have a way to kind of channel those into action. And they often face attacks on their credibility also because they're seen as foreign backed or as disconnected, which sometimes they are. And some of the grassroots organizations maybe have, the kind of protest energy, but they're trying to translate that into policy impact. And if they don't succeed, then that can leave citizens who came out to the street even more frustrated or disillusioned if civic engagement doesn't seem to have worked, or at least in the short term. And so part of what we're seeing is, how do we bridge this gap? How do we kind of combine the best of different kinds of civic actors? Of course, grassroots civic actors who may want to build out their skills in some of that more technical aspects of governance work, but may not want to build out their skills. There's sometimes important and legitimate reasons for small organizations that want to be more community-based and informal and volunteer-led to kind of keep that character. And really the best is for them to partner with organizations who do have some of those different capabilities. And so I think figuring out kind of what a particular grassroots organization wants, what's in their interest, and they should be in the driver's seat. Do they want to build out certain capabilities in the more technical side? Do they want to develop new partnerships and coalitions? And how can donors and external actors be supporters of whichever direction they choose to go to increase the effectiveness of their work? But one way or another, it's vital because the pandemic seems to have increased the isolation between civic groups in many instances, and certainly has accentuated the digital divide in places with limited connectivity. So these sort of connections that previously may have happened informally, people are all kind of together at the same gatherings and so on, they're happening less organically now. And so I think we have to be really quite deliberate at conceiving of what kind of partnerships are needed to strengthen the ability of grassroots civic actors to achieve their goals in support of the Summit for Democracy commitments, but also just their own goals for their own organizations. So that's the context in which I think we have a real urgency as donors and as external partners to build these domestic constituencies for reform. And at USAID, we're exploring new partnerships to enable that kind of support. So in Zimbabwe, USAID used this grant-making mechanism. It's kind of wonky, but it's called the annual program statement. And basically the idea is that it sets a very broad outcome of promoting accountability in creative ways in this case. And the idea was that it was very agnostic about the different solutions to get there. And it was quite open-ended in terms of applicants coming up with a range of different type of approaches. And that's much less prescriptive than USAID's usual approach, which is much more detailed and specific about the kind of support we're seeking to provide. So that's one sort of approach that we're pursuing. We also recently put out a request for information that's publicly available online, and I can share the link with anyone interested. That's trying to explore standing up a new initiative that is currently being called Powered by the People, which would work with US and international researchers, activists, civil society organizations to really look at this question of collective action and grassroots nonviolent action, and see how a donor like USAID could build more networks between different groups and really enrich exchange and learning and piloting of new approaches with a particular focus on youth civic actors. So that's another sort of strategy that we're pursuing. And finally, another kind of angle in that is we are exploring how new grant-making mechanisms, including grand challenges, as they're called in our world, which are, again, very open-ended calls for pulling together lots of different kinds of actors and then being creative about what kind of solutions emerge. And tomorrow, Administrator Samantha Power will be announcing a new innovative grant-making platform, particularly focused on combating transnational corruption. And there, I think part of what we're realizing is that sometimes these transnational issues, transnational corruption and transnational authoritarianism, the forces that we are opposed to are very globally networked. They're all coordinating. The money is flowing across borders. And so if we focus only at the grassroots level and only sort of in an isolated way, then it can be hard for us to take on some of those more transnational challenges, which is why I think the model that Accountability Lab has of translocal networks is quite interesting, because it's how do you get across borders, but still maintain the integrity and character of local actors. So I'll wrap up. Those are some of the strategies we're trying. There's definitely still more work to be done. Administrator Power said last month that we are now, USAID is now committing to pivoting towards moving a quarter of all of our funds directly to local partners within the next 4 years, and having 50% of our projects have some sort of co-creation element with local actors, which is really would be an extremely fast rate, a very ambitious commitment, but really reflects the desire that USAID has to support in creative ways, both financially and non-financially, these sort of grassroots actors on the front lines of change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abigail. Really interesting information and perspectives that you've shared with us. And I think that you've highlighted how a lot of this is basically one has to be creative, and in terms of international actors, one has to be creative, think outside the box and try things out and see how they go and adapt and learn. And when one international actor starts, then this can also serve as a model for others and then build that collaboration that you're talking about. And I would just give a shout out to something that you also alluded to, which is that in a way you're looking at this in terms of an ecosystem of positive change together with an ecosystem of positive support. And the person that I always admire who's used that term of ecosystem in terms of looking at change and support is Brent Halloran from the International Budget Partnership. So if you're here, you're hearing the shout out. And if you missed it, you should have joined our session. Last but not least, I'd like to turn to Margaret Maliwa. And Margaret we were chatting yesterday, the other day, and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I had met Margaret 10 years ago, because we have so much in common in terms of like interests and like complementary backgrounds and things. So I really hope that this is the beginning of collaboration and communication. But Margaret, for everyone's information, is the program officer for Eastern Africa with the Ford Foundation. And she has over 20 years of experience working around social justice with governments, civil society, and philanthropy. So like Abigail, she is one of these amazing people that has worn many hats, and so really can see things from a different ecosystem perspective. Margaret, again, I'm sorry to say that you have 5 minutes, like I've said to everyone else, but please, if you could share some of your wisdom and experience about why is it important for international actors to support nonviolent action protagonists, and then how should donors and other external actors approach this in new and innovative ways? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaska. I'll actually be reinforcing what my other panelists have just mentioned. And I just want to, first of all, to appreciate that communities at the grassroots are the ones most hit by socioeconomic and political repression being addressed in the Summit for Democracy. And when we look at issues like corruption, we know that corruption undermines democracy. It increases impunity, undermines access to essential services such as education, health, security, justice, and leads to violation of human rights and targeting those who expose corruption. Now, looking at the work of grassroots organization, we really think that when we work with grassroots actors, they are the ones who, as I mentioned, experience harassment. And specifically looking at those threatened most are youth, women, the minority community. We can look at journalists and other individual activists. Now, then this brings us to a point that we recognize grassroots action is the tipping point where transformative change occurs. And thus, if we don't, for instance, as Ford Foundation fund that specific the groups, then it becomes very difficult for transformation to take place. But then looking at how to achieve the Summit for Democracy commitments, this will come up with a framework. Now, this framework then is one of the guidelines that can be used to coordinate strategic actions that have clear agenda. And in specific at Ford Foundation, we are looking at marginalized voices, and which will also work at establishing broad coalitions and give power to the people to ensure that governments are accountable and transparent to its citizens. And when I talk of diverse community, I'm looking at the really supporting interests groups like women, people with disability, youth, and as I mentioned, minority groups, to identify platforms for ensuring that their voices are heard, and that we are also supporting them to build trusted allies within civil society, government, private sector, and their rights are protected. Now, why is it important that donors support this kind of approach? I think as my other panelists have mentioned, grassroots actors are the front line of response, hence amplifying the call for citizens, for government's accountability is critical. And I think if we don't support them, it weakens their ability to succeed in advancing democracy. Then as funders, we have opportunities of working, like for instance, the Ford Foundation works in 10 global offices. So in that case, what happens is we have opportunities of connecting up efforts with other funders, with government-led processes. And it's important to mention that next week, we'll also be having another project-led process, the OGP, which also includes the civil society efforts. So linking of these commitments that will be announced at the summit then gives clearer structures and accountability mechanisms that organizations then, local and grassroots organizations can therefore implement. Now, when we are looking at these commitments, I think it's also important to take note that nonviolent grassroots actions can help build momentum and energize engagements, further making case for importance of civic space as a place for public society actors or civil society actors and the government to engage constructively in services for the good. I also want to point out that when we are looking at nonviolent grassroots action, it has, as other panelists have mentioned, it has actually been proved successful. And this is relevant in providing space for networks and movements, as Abigail mentioned. Specifically, when we know we are working under very restrictive, or rather the grassroots organizations are working under very restrictive legal framework. Now, I don't need to mention about building the cross-border solidarity of these networks because this has already been mentioned. But I want to point out that processes like Summit for Democracy bring political leaders to be part of the commitment to, for instance, to eradicate corruption and strengthen democracy, and at the same time protect human rights. Now, this is an opportunity for then grassroots organizations to work closely with the government to strengthen their oversight and capacity and resources to address these issues that we are talking about. Now, this provides the grassroots organization an opportunity to partner and also become independent observer and hold the very governments accountable. And I think that there is more legitimacy in pushing for civic space and pushing for anti-corruption when this is led by grassroots organizations or grassroots nonviolent actors. Now, what can donors do in supporting these movements? And I want to mention a few other things that at the Foundation that we are doing. We recognize that the space has become very constrained. And we have examples of work that we are doing around giving long-term grants through through our initiatives like BUILD, where it's sort of institutional strengthening. So the actors don't have to start worrying, where are we going to get our fund? It strengthens the structures. And then secondly, we are also looking at resource hubs, because we recognize the challenges that whether it's on leadership, self-organizing, representation, negotiation, or community decision making, there are some capacities that local, grassroots non-violence actors do not have. So the purpose of the resource hubs that are again run by Global South organizations, then are able to offer, or rather to give new way of looking at things. For instance, that is looking at anti-patriarchal, structures, looking at anti-colonial way in which operations of civil society are looked at, anti-ableism, and looking at structures that distract true work, or rather truly the non-violent actors doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. Now, we think that this will support interests, again, in creating, incorporating the gender perspective in funding, because this is really, really important. And then we also, like Bagdigal mentioned, there's also increased, that is, capability and effectiveness of looking at how to sustain, build resilience, and resilience of the groups that we are working with. And I wanted also to mention the fact that when we talk about the partners, or rather the grassroots partners being at the driver's seat, it's not about us as donors deciding for them what should be in their program. They understand the circumstances, the context in which they are working. And then it means they have the capacity to also think through creatively ways in which they can implement this. And then I also wanted to mention that as funders, we have to also understand the nature of the evolving grassroots nonviolence action, and look at ways in which this evolvement is coming out. For instance, when we look at issues of narrative, there's lots of narratives that are negative. How do we continuously support positive narratives that continuously bring, or rather show the value of the work that they are doing? I'm looking at Africa being young, and we are looking at how do we, again, continuously have discussions of bridging the disconnect between tech organizations and the older, more traditional human rights and advocacy organizations. How do you continue connect the offline and online support? And then we are looking also at testing thought leadership, recognizing that there's scope to take high quality learning, research, and producing valuable insights that can also help sharing and learning across different network. And finally, I'm looking at we are looking at continuously look at how do we offer, as I mentioned, general operating support to critical set of grassroots actors that can continuously show, case the work that they are doing. And one of the things that we have been very deliberate at is also speaking to other funders to really start looking at ways in which we can support this action without necessarily creating lots of burden in terms of meeting so many legal and so many papers and so many of the things needed in funding that. And I think that I will end there and just continuously encourage funders who are here that it's important that we also become listening funders, because the grassroots nonviolent partners are able to really understand the situation that they are working in. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. You've covered so much that's valuable for all kinds of external stakeholders. And I think this is the beginning of a conversation that we all need to continue. We have a few minutes left and we've had quite a few questions. So I'm just going to read out a few questions. And if one of you can each volunteer to literally just touch on the question for a minute. I know that sounds crazy, but I just want to acknowledge some of the questions and let's continue this discussion and tackle these questions in future forums that we can launch together. So one question was, what are key ingredients for outside actors to design peer-to-peer learning activities and networks? Does one person want to volunteer quickly to answer that in 1 minute? Or at least respond to it. What are key ingredients for outside actors to design peer-to-peer learning activities and networks?
Well, I can volunteer.
Thank you, McDonald.
And also to say that I think that just in terms of a model answer, I would actually turn to some of the work that Margaret has been doing in East Africa with young civic society leaders from Uganda and Kenya. I thought that it was a fascinating model of bringing these different actors into the room and allowing them to converse and learn together and build those networks. So that's one way in which it can be done. The others are around the facilitation and sharing of knowledge that we've already touched on. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Another question from somebody is, how can movements tap into legal systems to hold access, leverage points with corrupt actors and to hold them to account? A big topic, but does anybody want to just tackle that in a minute or two? And then we're going to end after that.
I'm happy to jump in. I think that one of the benefits of external partnerships is to be able to bring the whole suite of non-financial tools to the table, as in addition to financial tools. And some of those tools are, in the case of the US government and the EU and the UK, the visa sanction authorities that they have and law enforcement tools and the kind of ability to freeze assets and otherwise neutralize spoilers to the extent possible. And I think ideally those can be done in a way that is informed by the experiences, insights, and investigations coming from grassroots actors. And so I know the US government has been welcoming input from civil society about how global Magnitsky sanctions get deployed in support of holding accountable actors engaged in corruption and human rights violations. And I think the US strategy on countering corruption that was released 2 hours ago talks about furthering opportunities for civil society input to deploy those law enforcement tools in a way that is as informed as possible about local realities. And so I think there's a lot of potential there. And I hope that other countries that have those sort of sanction authorities also provide windows for civil society to be able to input about how those tools are used so that they can be harnessed as effectively as possible.
Wow, thank you, Abigail, for that answer in 2 minutes. That was just so informative. We have 1 minute left. I would just like to acknowledge that all of you have pointed to something which we don't think about again, which is maybe we need some mapping about how these different things fit together so that we keep that in mind as in the international community. And also something that Margaret touched upon, that when new kinds of support can be for research, and that perhaps again, that can be supporting researchers, not just in the global north, like myself, though I love that support too, but actually researchers in the countries, in other countries that where social movements and other grassroots actors are receiving support or need support. So changing the balance in terms of that too. I think we're done. Thank you so much, everyone. And please send in your emails if you want to stay in touch. Do it right now before the session ends, and we will get back in touch with you. Thank you to all of you, 4 brilliant speakers, and thank you, TraCCC and Accountability Lab, and hope to see all of you again soon. And let's be in touch.